Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Managing and Maximizing Agency Data, sponsored by Cellebrite on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are John Wilbur, the resident agent in charge of Computer Forensic Laboratory at the NASA Office of Inspector General, Zach Terwilliger, the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, Scott Perry, the Special Agent in charge of the Cyber Investigations and Technical Operations Division at the Department of Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General, and Lou Kios, the Executive Customer Advisor at Cellebrite. So before break, Lou brought up a couple really interesting points. One of those specifically was around sharing of data. And I think that's the place we're going to start for the second segment here. When you talk about sharing data, there's nothing more important than being able to say, we have this, let's give it to Zach or Zach's folks, or vice versa. Zach can give it to, hey, John, we're seeing this problem that you guys are investigating at NASA. And I want to start with John. Talk a little bit about that idea of sharing data, because it also takes us back to this idea of where the data lives and how to access it. So we're talking about clouds or hybrid clouds or government-only clouds or the old quote-unquote data center. So John, pick me up and talk a little bit about what you're seeing.
What I'm seeing, at least from our point of view, is that we're not ready to put certain types of data into a cloud environment that's run by a third party. The government agencies want to keep this type of data close hold. For our point of view, we have a data center that is owned and managed by NASA, where we store this type of information. We do share it with our partner agencies through various means, with controls and several products that allow them to view the data, to run searches, to do tagging, but not necessarily take that data out of the system until they send us a request. We'll pull it out of the system and then give it to them.
Is the concern around the cloud, and we're not going to get into the deep, is it just the safety of it? Like, where's the data? Who has it? Who can access it? Or is there a broader kind of law enforcement issue here as well?
John touched on a good point where it is a evidentiary grand jury material issue where it has not, there is high cloud and certain things that are certain cloud structures that are certified for classified material, but it's a different type of data, different classification of data. And, the U.S. Attorney's Office, once again, like, it depends. I have to have a nice chain of custody from when we seize the evidence to where we processed it, to where we stored it, to where we presented it for trial. And unfortunately, if you have a cloud deployment, I can't say that Jimmy in the server room there accessed it or where exactly that data is sitting on the cloud, because it can move around as it should for load balancing and everything else. And I have to be able to call somebody in the court. The U.S. Attorney's Office should be able to call somebody in court to testify that that data was on that server, no one else accessed it. It's just easier to have it on premises where I can say it's locked behind the door. These are the people that had access to it. Here's my logbook. And there's no, I don't want to be the case law, basically, that where, okay, you put it in the cloud and it was either breached or you have to bring in half of the cloud provider to testify that no one's touched it. So that's kind of where we're at as an agency. And I've talked to people at DOJ and our attorneys on staff, and we're kind of stuck right now, unfortunately, as federal law enforcement in that regards.
Yeah, I think this is Zach over at the U.S. Attorney's Office. I think that's exactly right, what Scott's saying. I mean, especially if the metadata, who accessed what, who edited what, who's the original author, so many of our white collar cases go to intent, and, who changed what, when, and what were the context. That data becomes very important, and the integrity of that data becomes very important. And it's something that is subject to attack, and appropriately so, if we can't prove up our chain. One of the issues we've been talking about is, so we have all this data, where do we store it in a secure manner? And that's obviously an issue. I mean, we've seen with some of the most notorious leakers of the 21st century, is that we've got folks who access data who weren't supposed to have access to it, who've given it to our adversaries. So obviously securing it is an issue. And so, then it comes to the question of, who should get access to it, who needs access to it, who's monitoring who has access to it. And the other part, which was brought up earlier, is by Lou, then you have this information and it's critical, to get it out to people in a fast manner. Something that the listeners may be able to relate to is look at, let me try an analogy here. Look at what's happened with the Paycheck Protection Program. You had a lot of money that had to be pushed out very quickly to save struggling businesses. Well, anytime you're pushing out a lot of money and you've got to do it quickly or it's going to be moot because the business is going to go under, you're not going to have the chance to do the requisite due diligence you normally would want to do when you push out billions or trillions of dollars. So as a result, you're accepting the fact that some people are going to try to defraud you. I think we're in a little bit of a similar situation with the data. We have so much of it. We have to store it. We have to secure it. But for it to be useful, you almost have to incur some necessary risks to get it to the right people. Just having it and then not being able to take action on it, not being able to tell that sheriff's deputy, hey, you're walking up into a domestic violence situation where this individual has 3 priors and you should know there's a history of mental illness at that address. If you're not arming that individual through the computer-aided dispatch system with that information, what's the value of it? So I think that's a natural tension we're all experiencing.
I'd like to add to that if I could. That when you have these major incidents like Zach was just talking about, a lot of them are very time sensitive. And as I tell our customers and I tell my former colleagues at the federal government, and I've seen it, is somewhere in this process, if you're the executive, you're the person in charge, you're going to get a call from somebody. It could be on Pennsylvania Avenue, it could be a county commissioner, it could be a governor. They're going to ask you 4 basic questions. Who is it? How do we know them? And the last 2 I think are the most important. Who do they know? And do those people or that person pose an immediate threat to us? And to answer those questions, a lot of times you don't have all of that information. You haven't generated that, let's just say, by the Bureau. They have to reach out to other agencies and pull that information in. And if you haven't given a lot of thought on, again, how we're going to share this information, what's the tripwire here to make sure that happens? Do we have policies, procedures, the governance structure around it? That could really hinder the detectives, the investigators going out trying to solve this. So I think that's a major issue for executives as they continually try to get their arms around this digital intelligence data. Some of them see it a dilemma. I know when I talk to the state, local, and federal partners, that is still a major concern. You bring up storage and you talk about the cloud. I'm glad to say that they're more willing to have that conversation now. But like I believe Zach and Scott mentioned, you get to a point where you're saying, I just don't feel comfortable with this. And I think basically what it is, it's part of our culture. We like to hold on to information. And the other thing is, most people don't go to jail for not sharing information. They go to jail when they give out information they shouldn't be giving out. So it's easier just to hold on to it. And in today's environment, that could be a risky strategy.
You make a great point. This idea of it's less risky to hold on to the information, even though we've seen the challenges there. There was a gentleman back in the mid-2000s who worked at DoD, kind of coined the term secure information sharing. And I think that's something that I think a lot of agencies continue to strive for because of that fear of, well, if I share too much, if I share not enough. John, come back around to this a little bit because I think the question initially was around cloud to you and how you guys find the balance. If you have your data on premises but you still need to share it, what are you guys doing to kind of initiate that secure information sharing?
We have a web-based platform, a portal that we vet the users. Usually, it's our partner agencies, it's agents from National Science Foundation or Small Business Administration or some other OIG. We vet them, and then there's a two-part authentication. So you have passwords and usernames, and then another form of identification to marry up to actually get into the data. So there are several layers of authentication to actually get in to see the data. And it's behind NASA's firewalls and the security that NASA requires, big NASA. And then again, we then have permissions like with the data. This person can do X, Y, and Z with this data. They can look at it. They can tag it, but or they can export it. And we set those controls based on what the needs are. We have several U.S. attorneys who have access to our system so that they can review the data along with the agents to look at what might be important. But ultimately, everything always in the back of our mind is security of this data. This data cannot get out into the wild, or it could be damaging to the agency or to national security, to the United States itself.
It's interesting you talk about that several layers of authentication. What we've seen over the last couple of months in the civilian world, non-law enforcement world, we'll call it, is this push to this concept of zero trust. And it sounds like you guys have already kind of gotten there in many ways. We're going to vet you before we trust you. And then even when we trust you, we're still not going to trust you because we're going to say you can look at it, but you can't export it, or you can tag it, but you can't export it. So and then imagine also that this idea of, well, John can have access from Monday through Thursday, but on Friday we're turning off his access because that's when he said he doesn't need access anymore. I'm sure you have that piece to it as well. So John doesn't have access forever, even after the case is over.
Jason, can I add something to this too? I think that's one of the benefits that we've seen from all of these federal task forces that we have. When you bring in state, local, and federal, they vet them. They're all sitting looking at the same data. I mean, I know when I was at the Bureau and we were kicking up and starting the JTTFs, just getting people at the table. We had U.S. attorneys, we had postal inspectors, we had U.S. Marshals, DEA, all sitting in the same room, looking at the same data. And that's kind of, I won't say a workaround, but on those major cases, you need that type of environment. You need to break down those walls where everybody's looking at the data. So quality decisions can be made to keep either a community, a neighborhood, or our country safe. So I think that's a great move to address this particular topic. But and as you say, there are hundreds and hundreds of task forces out there. But I think the great benefit of it is that it cuts through all of that and puts everybody that needs to be looking at that data, gives them an environment that they can share it very easily, very open, and not worry about somebody's going to push a button and share it with somebody that shouldn't be seeing it.
That has been a challenge still, where you can give Zach mentioned load files before. That's a good interchangeable format. We have the standard expert witness format for forensic evidence files, but even so, it's a large data where it's nice that we have a lot of these tools nowadays that will do portable cases, something that I can put on a USB drive and give to a partner agency or another agent or even send it via a secure method. It's nice that the tools are starting to adapt to the field where I can give them formats to look at, and it's its own self-contained executable, and they pull it up and they can review things and tag it and send it back to me, and I can pull into my system and reanalyze it. So there are some other good mechanisms besides the web review platforms out there, but it's definitely a moving target between all these different things and what type of case it is and who you need to share the data with. It's a challenge.
John, let me come back around to you because I wanted to kind of get back to that question about how do you, again, going back to the trust issue, how do you ensure that, again, John has been using the data now for a month, for a week, for whatever it is, but now his access has to be cut off. How do you guys ensure that access does get turned off when appropriate?
Great question. Again, I think we've been doing zero trust before the term actually was even coined. We're dependent, though, on our case agents. They're working hand in hand with our partners, and when they say, "Hey, this case is closing," or that, we can turn it off at the source. So even though they still have their two-part authentication, they still have all their passwords. We've essentially severed that link that they can no longer get in. There's always the potential. I'm not sure how you give access, even though you've got all these controls, to someone. But they can still take a cell phone and take a picture of the screen. So, again, we would hope that our law enforcement partners are of a better moral character and wouldn't do such things. But we've seen examples, our great leakers, Edward Snowden, Bradley Manning, who have done just that. And that's a big challenge, and that's always in the forefront of our minds on what can we do. We've got to do everything we possibly can, but knowing that there are some things that may be a little bit out of our control.
Well, gentlemen, there's plenty more to dig out here. So let's take a quick break when we continue our conversation. You're listening to the panel discussion, Managing and Maximizing Agency Data, sponsored by Cellebrite on Federal News Network.